The following program does not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Reality Radio 101, its advertisers and sponsors, or its listening audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with psychologist, author, and speaker, Dr. Anna Baranowski, where mind, mood, and what matters to you are discussed. We're broadcasting live from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, on Reality Radio 101. Our email address is instudio101@gmail.com. And now, your host of the Bear Psychology Radio Show, Dr. Anna Baranowski.
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to be back with you again today. It is a very rainy day here in Toronto, and I'm looking forward to the conversation, remembering that our work is really about bearing witness to evolving mind, mood, health. Today we have a guest, an author and psychologist, Dr. Rickey Miller, and she was the staff psychologist at Toronto General, a chief psychologist at Scarborough Grace, and she retired in 2022 and published A Very Narrow Bridge, Reflections of a Psychologist in 2024. So we'll get to figure out how that came about. Dr. Miller created the Miller Social Intimacy Scale, which explores the connection between relationships, both physical and emotional. Her book reflects on a lot of questions that we need to ask and the choices that we make in life. Some choices are neglected. The story is a professional and personal memoir filled with gems of life that open doors for your journey along with Dr. Miller, intertwined with deeply meaningful clinical insights, the work she's done with her patients over a lifetime career. There's a beautiful awareness of how kindness and compassion are needed for clinical care. As I was reading this book, I was really impressed with the language that Dr. Miller was using and how she seemed to have this great insight into the care that each individual needed and to the meaning of really working towards connection on a very personal level and how that was transformative in her work. Now, I want to say something very interesting happened. I do a lot of supervision with many different clinicians, many in training. And just by chance, as I was reading through Dr. Miller's book, I was also doing supervision, and I was mentioning the book in my supervision. And one of the clinicians in training mentioned that actually by chance had worked with Dr. Miller many, many years ago. And the individual explained that years ago, when therapy was needed, the sessions were meaningful and incredibly helpful. And given my experience in reading the book, I'm not surprised because there's a certain level of sensitivity that really kind of pours through as I'm reading through the pages. So I want to introduce Dr. Rickey Miller. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm looking forward to learning a little bit more about your story and the book you've just written.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for such kind words. I really appreciate hearing all of those, all of that feedback is very moving. And I'm also very grateful that you read the book and that you um, took the time to think about it and to ask me to be here today. And I just want to say I'm thrilled that the book was a finalist in an international book award competition, the Next Generation Indie Book Awards 2025. I was really surprised that it placed as a finalist in that competition.
Oh, that's
And
beautiful.
so I just wanted to mention that in case you weren't maybe aware of that.
I was definitely not aware of that. Congratulations. It's always
Yeah.
nice to be recognized. Writing is a very, very difficult undertaking, and
Mhm.
writing a memoir particularly is very, very hard because you're drawing from your own life experiences. It can feel very exposing, and as a psychologist, it's particularly difficult to do it because we're so used to listening to the stories of others rather than sharing them. So maybe we can start with, like, I think you wrote 40 years of practice,
Yeah, 42 actually.
42 years of practice, and you did not write this book, A Very Narrow Bridge, until you retired in 2022. Explain that to me, why you waited and the meaning of writing now.
Well, it's sort of captured in the title, Reflections of a Psychologist.
Mhm.
So the word reflections has two meanings. I'm reflecting on my younger self. And the only way I can do that is when I'm older. And so, and at the same time, I really wanted to make the point about our common humanity. I wanted to break the distinctions that I think are often artificial between people we label as mentally ill and people we think are psychologically healthy. I really wanted to point out how much we have in common, how much I had in common with my patients, and how much their struggles reflected mine. And the only way I could do that, I think, is after so many years of experience. So I started writing it before I retired. You know, I was in private practice with another psychologist since 1990. And that was after I worked in the hospitals that you mentioned, the teaching hospitals and the community hospital. And it was towards I guess before I retired that I started writing it. It took me about 10 years to write the book. It was a slow process. And there were two versions. The first version was just my own stories. And I sent it off to publishers and I got wonderful rejection letters. My editor said, "Oh my goodness, this is incredible. You have all these publishers writing back to you personally saying that your writing is really excellent." And I said, "But they rejected the book." Like I was very upset. So I put the book aside for a year, the manuscript aside for a year. And then I was talking to my daughter, who I greatly respect. And she said, "Why don't you think of combining your stories with your patient stories?" So then I rewrote it, and um, that's the current form. So it really was a 10-year project altogether. I didn't just write it when I retired in 2022. I certainly had more time then to finish it though.
Yes, no kidding. Yeah, a clinical career is a very demanding one for sure.
Very.
So I think that's wonderful that you were able to get yourself to a place where you could really focus on that and make sure that it got into print. So
Right, right.
that is beautiful. I want to start actually by asking you a little bit about your scale because
Mm,
I
okay.
think that this is often at the crux of a lot of the work that we do with individuals
Absolutely.
needing care. And because my work is primarily with trauma, I find that even when I'm working with individuals, I just mentioned this to you before, Rickey, even when I work with individuals who have experienced extreme trauma, the ones that always seem to do the best are the ones that have deeply connected social networks where they feel a sense of belonging, love, and support,
For sure.
understanding.
For sure.
And then I came, as I was reading through your book, and I noticed that this was a really important scale that you had produced fairly early in your career. I want you to help us understand the Miller social intimacy scale and the connection between relationships, physical and mental health.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think the literature, the research literature abounds with examples and verifications of the fact that having at least one close relationship with a supportive human predicts better outcomes. And especially, even looking at medical patients, even looking at people who are dealing with chronic pain or any chronic illness, as well as people who have experienced trauma, as well as people who have experienced anxiety and depression. So it really goes across the board that we cope better when we have a close relationship. So what I did way back in 1982, that's when it was published. So I created a scale that measures the extent to which a person feels close to one other person. And it didn't matter whether it was a family member, a spouse, a friend. It didn't matter if it was same sex or opposite sex. The premise of my dissertation was that just having one, never mind a network, of course, the more the better, but just having one close relationship, supportive relationship with another person is protective and helps people cope with adversity, whether it's something as simple as a cold. And, my first research, I was just looking at college students, as we often do for your dissertation. And I was looking at how people recovered from having viruses like colds during the school year, and looking at the difference between those who had a high level on the Miller social intimacy scale, like a high level of closeness, if you like, with one person, versus people who did not, who had a low, who scored low on the scale. And there was a significant difference in how fast they got better from as simple a thing as a virus.
That is
So,
incredible.
so
Wow.
there's been research since 1982. There's thousands, if not more than that, articles, scientific experiments, and all kinds of research that have confirmed that having even just one relationship that's close and supportive is protective and helps people cope better with any life stressor that they have to face. So, and we know in our therapy sessions that our relationship with the patient is absolutely crucial, if not the most important variable that predicts if the effectiveness of therapy. That when that relationship is strong and we're providing acceptance and compassion and help as well, that if that relationship is close in that way, it's of course not mutual, it's not reciprocal, but that relationship is crucial for people feeling the connection with the therapist and therefore improving. And when there isn't that connection, or when the connection is very weak, patients don't usually do very well. So that's been verified in research as well. So the Miller Social Intimacy Scale is published in the Journal of Personality Assessment, and it gives me so much pleasure and joy and gratification to see that it's still being used internationally. It's been translated into many different languages. It takes very little time to complete. It's like 5 minutes to complete. It's, I think, very simple to do, very simple to score. So I think it's really gratifying to me that researchers continue to send me emails
You know,
thanking.
it's my impression that the personal impacts the professional. So, on that note, given that it was so early in your career, what was it about you or your life or your motivations that led you to think about intimacy and bringing that in as a very
Mm.
crucial part of your professional work?
That's a really good question. And I think what happened there is, I was with a supervisor who was really into locus of control,
Right.
which is, a construct that measures the extent to which a person attributes outcomes to themselves or to chance or to others. And he was, yeah, that was what he intended that I would research, that I would be in that area, because most of the time when you're in graduate school, you follow your supervisor's lead in terms of research topics.
Except for
But
you, Ricky,
not
right? You had
me,
a
not me.
mind of your own.
Yes, I did. And I was afraid, I was fearful. I have that in my book in presenting this idea to him because I thought he wouldn't go for it, but he did, to his credit. Why did I choose this? I think during my childhood years, I felt very lonely and I had difficulty establishing and maintaining close relationships with the friends that I had. And I didn't understand why that was. And I had, there were some very hurtful things that friends did. I have that in my book.
Yeah.
Some of the um, anti-Semitic, actually, and hurtful things that happened. And I was very much into helping others. I really got a lot of gratification from helping my friends, but I didn't get much back. Or I did for a while and then they disappeared and I felt alone and rejected. So I think that gave me the impetus to think about, my own striving for a close relationship. It gave me the impetus to think about how important it was for me personally to find a close friend that I could support, but also get support from. And I think that experience prompted me to think when I was in graduate school, and I really wanted to understand people. I was very committed to psychology. And there was no question I wanted to be a psychologist for many, many years. I thought, well, I really want to understand this. How important is it to have a close relationship with a person? And I knew people who were who had very close relationships with a dog, like with their pets. No question that was important. But I wondered, how important is it for someone to have a close relationship with another human being, whoever they might be? And I came at it thinking it didn't matter what the relationship was. I thought probably it doesn't matter whether you have a close relationship with a sibling or with a spouse or with a friend, as long as it's mutual. The scale captures that.
Like a
So it's
mutuality.
not
Okay.
one-sided. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're giving and receiving. Yeah. So, getting the scale, it took a long time to boil down the items. I remember using huge computers in the University of Waterloo that took up the entire basement of the math building and made a god-awful noise. And I
So I just
remember,
want to ask you a quick question. Was it a logistic regression analysis that got you the items?
yeah, it
Okay.
was, but with the computer doing all of those analyses
Yeah.
over hours. Yes, and
But
I was
that's how you identified the crucial questions.
the crucial questions, and also I then had to test for homogeneity to make sure the scale was internally consistent. And it has a very high level. Those selected items have a very, very high level of construct. Um, you know, they're similar. They're measuring the same construct,
Right, right.
right?
That is amazing. You know, it's funny how I never came across Miller's social intimacy scale. I just, we're in the same city, and I somehow I just never, it's such an interest of mine. Anyways, I'm looking forward to seeing more about it because it's only something that I'm looking at just now, but because it ties in so well with so much of what I see in terms of beneficial outcome for
Yes,
trauma clients. This is
right.
largely what I do. So thank you for the explanation of
Oh, you're
that.
welcome.
Um, you, the book struck me with the idea of intergenerational trauma. But you don't use that language in the book, but I suspect you've given it some thought. Um, and
Yes, yes. Yeah.
how it is that in your childhood you were lonely, like what kind of upbringing you had, with
Hmm.
all of the dramatic events that occurred both in your
Yeah.
parents' life and in your own life. How
Yes.
do you think that played into your rather lonely and rejected childhood? And was there a time when you felt that changing for you? What was the marker of that changing? And I'm asking you this because you're both a psychologist, but also a human being. You've seen that really we are absolutely the same as our clients. Nothing makes us different. It's hard to apply, um, you know, our great clinical insights for everybody else upon ourselves. We're faulty, but we're doing this work and it's meaningful work. So
Yes.
this shaping of you, your childhood, what your parents went through, intergenerational trauma, how that shaped you and your lonely experience, and when that changed. That's a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I wasn't always lonely. I wasn't always feeling rejected. I did have some relationships that were quite fulfilling, even during my childhood. But I think the hurtful ones had a huge impact. That was my point. But I think that certainly, like all of us, our parents have huge impact and their experiences upon us. My parents, they had me and my sister, so they had two girls. And so there was no question that we would have careers. There was just no question. And I don't think that would have happened in that era if there was a girl and a boy in our family. I think that my father's incredible resilience and my mother's incredible resilience had a huge impact on me. When my father, and I have this in my book, when my father told me that he was the only survivor, and talk about trauma, of this horrible massacre in his little village in Belarus, that along the way, somehow of walking 600 kilometers to Warsaw, um, somewhere along the way, if not in Warsaw, three of his siblings died, and he was the only survivor. The fact that, he told me about those stories and the effect that's had on him gave me tremendous respect for him, even though he had a very bad temper, and it was hard for me to deal with that. But I had enormous respect for his resilience and his brilliant mind. And it always came back to me when I had the education that I had, and had the chance and did go to university, that he never had that opportunity. And he was absolutely brilliant, no question about that, and learning as much as he could about everything, especially astronomy. So that had a huge impact on me. And my relationship with him was very complicated, but in the end, very close. And then my mom went through trauma, having been abandoned by her, basically both parents, and then left on the doorstep of the Salvation Army Church in Quebec City. And my mother having to cope and take care of her brothers with a very abusive mother. And I was looking at my mom was really sweet and warm and kind, and I had a very close relationship with her. And I marveled at the fact that she decided to transcend her past and treat me with love, even though she had not. And I think this impression on me that we're not determined by our past, that our past trauma doesn't dictate what kind of person we choose to be.
I love that
That had a huge,
idea that there's
huge,
choice, there's
yeah,
a choice in all of this, and that we can bring that forward. You know, sometimes when you have these very layered and complicated experiences in your home, the fact that you're able to look at your own parents and see, you know, their own wounds,
yeah,
but be kind of loving in your memory toward them is it's very, very sweet to hear it, Rickey.
yeah,
I see how you've let the love and the warmth of your parents stay with you regardless of their own injuries, because sometimes um, you know, when we feel hurt by the the childhood experiences we've had in our family of origin, it's hard for us to see clearly the injuries that our own parents have experienced. What made that
mhm.
possible for you?
Well, I think their behavior, I think the fact that they were so committed to both my sister and me getting a good education and having all the opportunities they themselves did not have. That because they were open with me about their stories, that helped me. And not, of course, with many of my patients, it's not the case that parents don't sometimes don't share what actually happened in their past, and the children are just left with parents who sometimes maybe come through, sometimes don't, and they don't understand them. But I had parents who were okay with and chose to tell me quite a bit about where they came from and the hardship they experienced. So then there was a huge contrast in my mind between what they went through and how they were treating me. Um, and I was able to understand my father's temper problem a lot better when I understood his story, why he was so mad and why he was so bitter. So I think that in the end, their loving behavior and how supportive and giving they were to me had a huge impression, and said to me what I said earlier, that no matter how bad things have been in the past for people, and I saw this with my patients all the time, they have the choice. We have the choice to do better. We don't have to follow in our parents' footsteps in that way, because it's often thought, you have an abusive parent, you're going to have an abusive child. It's not. It's a choice.
Mhm.
And I saw time and time again with my patients, people who lived through horrendous trauma, who were choosing to be loving and kind and have close relationships with others, and then other people who had been through similar trauma becoming and choosing to become very angry and bitter and hurtful towards others. So there's a choice. And I think one of the main points in my book that I'm making is to understand that choice, and to understand that to get there, we need to accept how we feel, and accept the hurts with compassion, and accept our mistakes with forgiveness, and approach them with an attitude of forgiveness, and at the same time use logic and reason to look at how we can do better. What do we need to do to do better and feel better and cope
Often,
better?
often we end up judging ourselves based on the information that we had at the time that a choice was made, without any kind of compassion toward ourselves
Right.
regarding, you know, just the reality that sometimes we don't have all the information and we can't tell the future and we just do not know everything.
Right. I think that compassion and love for ourselves is really difficult, and we don't exercise that enough. I think we too often criticize ourselves, especially for making decisions that don't work out. I think we too often find it easy to be angry with ourselves and berate ourselves. I think it's really hard for us to put our arms around ourselves with love and compassion and understanding. And that, I think, is one of the key notes in my book, is that I'm really trying to communicate to my patients and to myself to be forgiving of mistakes I've made, to be accepting of my feelings, and to have understanding, compassionate understanding for myself. But at the same time, to use logic and reason to figure out, okay, what do I want to do next? What moving forward would be best for me? That's what I often taught patients with pain problems, depression, anxiety, trauma. And also saw a lot of people with trauma, especially sexual abuse, which is unfortunately rampant, especially among women, not exclusively among women, unfortunately, but many, many women in my practice. And I think a lot of the patients that I saw with chronic pain problems from an injury, where they were expected to get better and they didn't get better, had actually suffered sexual abuse in the past or some trauma in the past. That often happened.
Mm-hmm.
So
how would you approach that kind of pain presentation where you have pain with the underlying traumatic abuse?
Well, I mean, in all different ways. There wasn't any one approach. And I think that's something we learn as psychologists, that there are many different approaches, but there isn't one that fits all, one size fitting all. So in my book, I have a really good example of one patient who never told me exactly what happened. We only talked about it as an it. And we were still able to talk about how it affected her, how she felt about it, meaning the experience. And it was pretty clear that it was some type of abuse, likely sexual abuse. But what I found, and this has also been verified in by many researchers, that the past trauma takes a toll on a person's ability to cope. So later on, when this person I was just referring to had a car accident and was suffering pain that became chronic, it's probably true that she was having a harder time coping with that pain because she was still coping with the pain of the earlier trauma. And there was a clue for that particular patient in the way she was speaking to me every time she talked about her brother, as I mentioned in the book. She hesitated. And I heard that hesitation. And I asked her about why she was hesitating, or did you notice you were hesitating when you mentioned your brother? And right away, she knew what it was, and then made a decision not to disclose all the detail, but enough that I understood that it was something really bad that happened, that her brother did to her. So I think that with patients who had a previous trauma, some patients were open and disclosed it. Like some of the patients I saw with chronic pain were open in saying, this happened to me in my past. Other patients, like the one I just mentioned, were not. It was kept close by in their mind, but it wasn't something they came out with. So I had to listen for a clue. But I often did listen for that clue if someone had a chronic pain problem. Not that, I wasn't biased in thinking there had to be something there, but I was always wondering if there might be something there that was making it harder for them to cope. Because a past trauma doesn't just go away. You probably see this all the time. It takes energy to cope with it. And if someone is not coping that well with it, it can take a lot of energy. So when something else happens now in the present, it can be more difficult for them to deal with it because they're still dealing with something that happened in the past.
Absolutely. And that I think about it as like the past is pouring into the present, and it shows up in ways that are I mean, it's really indelible with inside of ourselves, but I love the way you express that, this idea that a person can share when they're ready and
Yes,
also in the way that they're ready. And it
right.
does not have to be a fulsome disclosure of all the details in order for somebody to arrive at a new place of resolution around the trauma.
That's exactly true. That's exactly right. And it's a mistake to and for people to hear this who are listening, it's a mistake if a therapist says it has to be in this stage. You have to go through these discrete stages
Mhm.
in order to get better. No, it's really has to be individualized because everyone's different and people's needs have to be respected. So some people really benefit from disclosure, really need that, and other people, it's destructive to do that.
Mhm.
So I think one needs to really respect, a person needs to respect what they need
Mhm.
and need to advocate if they're in therapy for what they need. And I think the therapist needs to respect. Sometimes it's better not to disclose
Absolutely.
exactly what happened.
Yes, and there are many ways to work that allow us to work deeply with clients without having all of the
Yeah.
details of an event. It's a good approach for some people. They need to go down that.
Right,
This is
right.
where we kind of make a clear discernment, applying what is needed for an individual rather than applying a,
Yes,
blanket
right,
approach to everybody. And,
right, right.
if you're working with a clinician and they're like, every one size fits all,
Yeah,
come on and
no,
get it, then that just may not be a very sensitive approach to the individual. I am just wanting to get to some of these questions. Some of them are a little bit more lighthearted, so let's sift through a few of them and see how we do.
sure.
This one is just starting with good afternoon, doctors. This is from Lisa. Hi, Lisa. Thank you for writing in. How did Dr. Miller get her first name? It's so unique. Love your show, Lisa. Thank you, Lisa.
Well, Lisa, you can see how old I am, I think, from this, but at the time, there were
No,
a lot.
people can't see how old you are. It's just completely radio today. So, do you want to
Okay,
tell people how old you are?
well, I'm 72. And in the day when I was born, this is in the 1950s, 1953 to be exact, it was actually not uncommon to name girls Ricky. And when I was in school, there were three other girls named Ricky that were in the same year as I was. So, I think my mom said to me that she thought it was a great name, a nice name. Certainly, it has certainly become a unique name for a woman now. And for many years, people would write to me as Mr. They really thought I was a man. And it still happens. That still happens when I am corresponding with someone, that they're often surprised when I call and they find out I'm not a man. So it's the answer. It was just a popular a name, and my parents liked it.
Generational, I get it. It is a great name. Here's another one. Since Dr. Miller is from the GTA, is she related to our Toronto ex-mayor David Miller?
No, I'm not related to any Millers. And as I've said in the book, the name came from an immigration officer when my father came to Canada with his mother in the 1920s. And he came, the mom and the dad met them at the port of Halifax. And they went to this immigration officer who recorded their name, and the last name was Plutnik. And he said, Plutnik is no name for a Canadian. Take the name Miller. Okay, so he was renaming everybody. all these immigrants coming across these officers were giving them new names, and they were giving them what they figured were good Canadian names. So as a result, I'm not related to any Miller.
Okay. And this one is from Ken. Hello, Ken. Ken asks, when writing a book such as this, are there any legal ramifications of talking about patients? Oh boy, are there, Ken. Let's have Rickey answer that one.
Yeah, thank you, is of course. So what I did was I went to a lawyer with a draft, and I expressed a concern. I said, okay, so I've taken, as far as the patients go, I've mixed them all up so that I referred to one patient, but they're really a conglomeration of patients. So there's no one patient that I've written about in the book. So I wasn't concerned about the patients because I really had protected their confidentiality was protected, and their identities were protected.
Yeah,
But
that's
I,
a
yeah,
Yeah, that's a really common way of working. I'm just uh, finishing off some drafts for a book that I'm writing, and we are exactly doing the same thing. They're composite clients, and
right.
the publisher was very clear because when I submitted one of the drafts, and the publisher sent back just to make sure. These are not like you're not disclosing the real details of your patients, are you?
Right, right.
No, 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 never. That would really
Yeah,
be a really awful thing to do. Can you imagine a client
yeah.
reading the book and then saying, "This is my story"?
Yeah, you know, I was really happy to do the conglomeration composites because I was hoping if any of my patients read my book, that they would feel that other people, not just them, experience these issues. They would see right away it wasn't them. They would see there were pieces of them, but pieces of other people. And I was really hoping they would see how common, how we all have this commonality, that they're not alone. They're not the only ones with this issue.
Mhm.
When I went to the lawyer, who was really helpful, I wasn't so much concerned about the patients because I felt I had done really well in making them all composites, and therefore protecting their identities. But I was concerned about other people that I was writing about in my book, and you know, he just said no, it's fine. There's no defamation. I was worried about defamation.
Yes,
And
of
he
course.
and he explained to me, you know, that's if you say something false um, that ruins someone's reputation. And not only was I not saying anything false, but he said you were actually being kind and understanding when you were talking about people like your sister and your ex-husband. And he said, you know, nothing to worry about. He was, you know, I gave him sections to read. So once I went to the lawyer for that consultation, I felt fine.
Well, I would imagine that would be particularly concerning for you, given that you um, shared a lot about your divorce, which was
right.
very contentious, your children's lives, and your relationship with your sister. And I wanted to ask you actually, are you connected with your sister Terry now, or did
Yes.
that never kind of come back together?
No, actually, we have established, I think, a very good connection, as good as can be, with limitations, just because of the different people that we are. Um, and the common thread has become health. So she's 79, and so she has health issues, and I also have sciatic pain, so I have health issues. And so she freely communicates how to me how she's doing, and I freely communicate back how I'm doing. And so there's no animosity or any anger. It's all understanding, and we're helping each other through the health issues. So we found a common channel that
Nice.
doesn't that isn't contentious, right?
Sure.
And so I'm very happy about that I have that connection.
Oh, I'm so happy because I could hear in the book there was a kind of current of like a longing for that relationship to feel
Yeah.
somehow together. And so, this is also a great example of relationship repair is always a possibility, even when you're in your 70s. So go, everyone. This is
Yeah.
from Tim, who says, congratulations on the book. Can you over therapy a client, meaning too many sessions?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's where, Anna mentioned this earlier, that there are different approaches for different patients, and I said the same. And one of the main points is how do you know which approach? You really need to listen to the patient. You need to be respectful and draw this out of the person, because I think in the end of the day, we know what we need. I really believe that. I think we know what we need better than anyone. So when someone is in therapy and it's going on for anything longer than whatever was agreed to or whatever was planned, it's really important, incumbent upon the therapist, to ask the patient what's going on, and do how do you feel about setting a date for graduating. I mean, I always refer to it as graduating. And how do you define when you reach that point? Because of course, when people graduate from therapy, it's not like their lives are all great and everything's tied up. There's a lot of work to be done at that point. But the person has the skills or the coping strategies needed to be able to move on independently. And of course, how to move towards graduation, whether it's fewer sessions over time, whether it's stopping at a certain point, like that, again, depends on the person. But yes, it's very, it does happen that when therapists fail to examine the whole question of graduating, and the person is dependent or has become dependent on the therapist, it's very easy for that to go on and on and on and on and on. And that's not good. Obviously, it's not good for the patient to be that dependent on a therapist, because at some point that's going to end. The therapist will move, or the therapist might retire or something, and then that's going to can create a trauma
Mhm.
for that. So yeah, it is possible for someone to receive too many sessions, to be in therapy for too long.
I
Um,
love the idea of including, and I usually bring this in to therapy at some point, the ways in which we develop interconnecting circles of community to ensure that we're building that concurrent to
right,
therapy sessions, making sure that life is being kind of built up, even if it means you have um, sessions that are longer and longer in between. You
right,
might do those tune-ups, but you get an opportunity to make sure that you're also building everything you need to have a
right.
meaningful human community around you. This one's from Carl,
Mhm.
who says, is the book available now? Thank you very much. Now, Carl, I'm going to answer this question because I want to make sure that you know exactly where to get it. So it's going to be on Amazon. You can get it easily. You can buy it there. You can go to Rickey Miller Psychologist.com to Dr. Rickey Miller's website, and she has a page about the books. And you can also go to Goodreads. That's one of my favorite places in terms of checking out new books. Dr. Miller's book, A Very Narrow Bridge, Reflections of a Psychologist, has a 4.7 out of 5 rating on Goodreads. And I always love looking at that because you can read a little bit about, what other people are saying about the book. So that's what I have to say about it. Do you want to add anything, Rickey?
Yes, I just want to add that it was out in November of 2024, so it's certainly available. It's in libraries as well, um, and I think it can be also ordered. I know it has been ordered from Barnes and Noble and Indigo. But it's certainly available on Amazon. All you have to do is search the title and my name. That's
A Very Narrow Bridge, Reflections of a Psychologist, a memoir, Dr. Rickey Miller.
right.
Here's another one. See, usually like these days, because we now have, I think it's between 8 to 12,000 live listeners. So thank you everybody for kind of tuning in and taking an hour out of your day, because I have to say it just makes this so much um, of an enjoyable experience for myself and often for the authors as well. It's great to receive your questions, and it's wonderful to be able to engage in such a wonderful community that comes to listen once a month. So that's really fun. This one's from Francis, who says, so is this book actually discussing the life of a psychologist interacting with her clients?
It's it's the stories of a psychologist and the stories of patients that she's treated interwoven with each other along thematic lines. So it's not chronological, it's thematic. So when I talk about um, a hurtful experience that I went through, I'm then in my book, I'm reminded of hurtful experiences patients have gone through and how I've helped them. And I talk about how I coped myself at the same time. So I'm going back and forth between my life and their lives as reflections of each other, really, and trying to figure out ways of making life more livable, more gratifying along the way. That's why I call it a very narrow bridge as a metaphor of life, that we're trying to keep our balance. And I really make the point a lot through the book that caring for others and helping others helps us ourselves and helps us keep our balance on that bridge.
That's really beautiful. Yeah. And I mean, you had quite a bridge to navigate, you with your story around the very contentious divorce that you experienced, and interspersed in the story of that, you wrote about, clients and their experiences.
Right.
Can you tell us how you managed to get through such a contentious divorce and then be able to just focus on your clinical work, how you faced it and how you healed from it?
Well, again, I think the support I received from friends was absolutely invaluable during that horrible time. It was a terrible time. It was very difficult to cope with the attack. It was all about my main theme was about money, because my ex had um, lost a lot of money in his attempt to build a business. And I had saved a lot of money for the children, and he wanted the money that I had saved. That was really the main theme. There were other problems as well. But during that time, I think the only way that I managed um, was to have supportive people around me, including my mom. She was really supportive, but friends were critically important to me. And the other thing that I went through during that time, I was treating patients who had all kinds of marital issues and relationship issues. And I kept questioning how it was that many of them were able to communicate with each other and keep their relationship going. And I was not. And initially, I felt that as a failure. I felt it as a personal failure. And I also felt it was a bad thing that I had stayed as long as I had and that I was on the receiving end. I felt like I didn't have a choice because he left me. But I think it caused me to really examine myself in a different light and therefore my patients in a different light. And I came out of that much better able to help patients with relationship issues, with much more understanding, but also much more insight about how to cope with a great hurt and rejection by someone you love. So I think in the end, it really it enriched my understanding, enriched my ability to do good work with those patients who were facing similar trauma. And I would say it was a traumatic experience that I went through. And I had
like a traumatic divorce.
Yeah, traumatic divorce. I had never been to court, and I was in court 14 times over the 3.5 years.
Wow.
And lost. I kept losing all these motions. Like I think out of the, I don't know, 14 motions, I probably lost 11 of them. So it was very disheartening. But I had, I came out of that with much more awareness and insight. I was able to help people in a much better way. I think that's often the case when we go through hardship ourselves as therapists. We have more insight and understanding.
Yeah, forged by the fire of our lives, we can be the best
Absolutely.
clinicians.
I think so. I really do believe that. And it also helped me understand resilience a lot better.
How so?
Well, the question always came up for me with my patients. Some patients would go through hell on earth and somehow they'd be able to cope, come out of that and cope. And others would go through experiences that appeared to be much less difficult, and we're having a great deal of trouble coping. And it's a very complicated question, the question of resilience. What builds resilience? I think certainly the support of others, just coming back to that again and again, that has a lot to do with how resilient we are. And I was lucky. I had close relationships and a mom who was supportive to me during that experience, but not everybody has that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think resilience has a lot to do with support that we get. But I think it also comes from self-esteem, having confidence in ourselves and our own resources and ability to manage. And I did have that strong feeling in myself that no matter how bad things were, somehow I was going to get through it, even though I didn't know how I was going to get through it.
Some of what you're saying makes me think again about the importance of a good clinical relationship and how that could be the so-called the bridge
Yeah,
that helps people transition from really either no or unsatisfying relationships to at least one
yeah,
meaningful close connection, because the in therapy you learn about relationship repair, because inevitably, especially if somebody has relational struggles, inevitably there's going to be some breaches, and then there's this wonderful opportunity to repair the clinical relationship, and then the individual starts to recognize what they can do in their personal life to have meaningful relationships, and that they are not meant to be perfect. They're meant to be, cracked and,
yeah.
imperfect and, sometimes difficult, but, we have this capacity. We have about 3 minutes left. I would really, really be grateful, Rickey, if you could tell us what your life looks like now, 2, 3 years past retirement. What has it been like for you as a psychologist, leaving that career behind and landing in your life in the way it is right now?
So I would say because I took a year and a half to tell all my patients about my plan, so they would have enough time to prepare, um, especially the ones that I was seeing for longer, that not the short-term patients, because I had some that I was seeing for a longer period. So I told them a year and a half in advance, but I also told myself a year and a half in advance. And the reason why I needed that time, and they needed that time, was because unfortunately my partner worked. She was ill for many years and worked up to the point where she couldn't work anymore, and then suddenly had to stop. And I inherited like 40 of her patients which I had to feel I had to care for in some way or transfer to someone. And I didn't want that to happen with my patients. So I wanted to, while I was healthy and I was able, I wanted to respectfully withdraw my services, not suddenly.
Oh, Rickey, that is
Yeah.
such and this is what I was left with. Your kindness and compassion and care for the patients that you saw over the course of your professional career, and the dignity and respect in which you
Yeah.
closed your practice to ensure that each of those individuals had time to prepare themselves. Well, I just have an
Yeah.
enormous positive feeling about how you handled all of that. That's just such a
Well,
beautiful part of the
well,
story.
well, thank you.
We have 1 minute left. So any last things you would like to tell our listeners today? And by the way, thank you everybody for tuning in today, Rickey.
Well, thank you for having me, and I thank all the listeners as well. Just about the relationship, I just wanted to mention knowing when to leave a relationship is a crucial thing, and that's one of the problems that I had in my relationship. So it's not just relationship repair, which you mentioned, which is really important, but sometimes a relationship's beyond repair. And I think knowing when it's wise and in our best interest to leave and how to leave is also crucial and often missed. And the other thing I just want to mention is I don't think we give ourselves enough compliments. I don't think we give ourselves enough love and compassion. Like I said, we are, most of us, happy to criticize ourselves. And we do that very fast, very quickly. But I don't think we say enough to ourselves, wow, I did that well, or I coped with that really difficult situation better. And not patting ourselves on the back, I'd like to leave that with everyone. I think it's so important to reflect every day on anything you do that's good for you and to actually say to yourself, wow, I did that well, or that was nice of me, or that was kind of me. Some
Thank you.
compliment.
Thank you very much, Rickey, for joining us today. Thank you to all the listeners. I look forward to our next show. Be well, everybody. Take care of yourself. Signing off. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with Dr. Anna Baranowski, right here on Reality Radio 101.